All right, let's look inside this thing. I'm feeling pretty rough. Every few weeks, my daughter brings home some kind of a new sickness from school for me to try out. And this one, it's not been too bad. I'd give it like a 6 out of 10. Or maybe like a 5 out of 10, because the fever only lasted one night. So I'll try not to make that come across the audio too much. So for this, I just cut down the actual rear shell, and it was right about at the headphone jack. Smoothed it out, sanded it, and then I put a piece of plastic on, flat piece of plastic, tacked that in place with some hot glue, and then used epoxy all around it, sanded it, and painted it. For the trim, this one's just normal. This side I had to do a little bit of trimming because I didn't use the little lanyard hole on the side here. I just used 2 of the solid pieces. So I had to trim this up just a little bit so it would fit. So there's not much room to play around in here. The battery presses up against the back cover, sandwiched between that and the screen. And also this I use for the start and select buttons. I had to angle this and file it down and just check it and redo it just to make the perfect amount of room and make it smooth. Make sure there's no sharp edges or anything that could hurt the battery. Put a little bit of Captain tape on here just in case. But it fits in here perfectly. A millimeter extra. I mean, there's no space on here. I had thought about, and I still might do it maybe on a future build, about putting an extra speaker on each side. I think I could put 1 extra speaker on each side of the battery to have 2 rear crank speakers along with the 2 forward facing. That could be pretty cool. So for the add-on board, I cut it in half and shaved it down. So here's one piece, and here's the other piece. There's not a whole lot that you need to reconnect when you do that. There's 2 traces here and this trace here. Also, the back is kind of like one big trace, so you need to reconnect that to itself. So here you can see a lot of the wiring going across. This is magnet wiring. It's very thin, and I use it everywhere I can because it just takes up so little space. So here you can see the kill switch. I just wired up a regular tech switch to it to relocate that. And under here, there's the first 2 contacts on this power switch are the ones that we need. So I rewired those, and those go around to the relocated power switch in the front. For these, I drilled a hole and used 2 little screws to help push down the soft tag switches for the L1 and R1. With the soft tag switches for the L2 and R2, I had to do a little extra work inside here because the button was so much bigger. But with the clicky tacks, this nice and easy, just drill a hole. The port cover I like to use is 3D printed, and then I cut and shave it down. It doesn't fit exactly right, so I had to do a little bit of filing to get it to fit right. On the back here, there's also the audio mod. So there's a resistor and a capacitor. So what's happening is, this is the amp, and this leg needs to be disconnected from the board. And we need to wire an 18K resistor to it. Then to that resistor, we need to wire a 4.6 nanofarad capacitor. And then that capacitor gets wired to the bottom connection on this R6 resistor. Once you do that, the first and third pin is now your left channel connection. And that looks like this. So we lift the leg, we wire the resistor 18K. Actually, this one, I lost my 18K resistor pack, so I used a 15K resistor and it seems to work just fine. So I guess there's a little wiggle room there. So the resistor is wired to the capacitor is wired to this resistor on the bottom. And the speaker is wired to the first and third. You might be looking at this saying, gross, there's hot glue everywhere. But I think hot glue gets a bad rap. The way I like to use it is good for me, because I can come back and make changes to it. But for most people who want things more permanent than that, it's a pretty easy fix. You use your hot glue to tack something in place and then come back with your epoxy or other means just to secure it permanently. For me, I don't mind this, because I'm always messing around with things. I'm always tinkering, I'm always redoing stuff. So like these shoulder buttons, for example, this is the same board that I used on a few other things, a few other builds. Whenever I get bored with it or have a new idea, I come back and I can just tear things off, clean it up, and then try something new. So here I took off the soft tack switches that I had on the first build of my Slim, and I tried the regular clicky tack switches, and it's fine. If ever I feel like I want to do it more permanently, I can put some epoxy on there, I can clean it up. But the idea is you just tack something into place with your hot glue, and then you can reposition it, heat up that glue and get it exactly right. Like if the button is rubbing in here, I can take it off, I can heat it up a little bit and move it, and then whenever it solidifies, boom, it's better. I think it gets a bad rap. You don't want to use it for everything, but you can use it for a lot. All right, let's look at the D-pad. It's an Xbox D-pad, and apparently a lot of people don't like the Xbox D-pad. I didn't know that. But I guess what they don't like is when it's in the controller, it is really a long distance between the top here and the button contacts. So whenever you use it, it's sort of like rocks a lot. I think that floaty kind of rocking feeling is what people don't like. But what I've done, I had to cut all that out to make room for it to fit in here. This bottom piece is it's all the actual parts, but I just shaved away all the parts that I don't need to make room, to make it fit. So there's none of that rocking feeling. It's just a direct, it feels like a regular D-pad. I think it feels better than a regular D-pad, that's why I did it, And I like the look of it. I really like the look of it. It's nice, it's round, it's got these diagonals in here. You're playing Contra or whatever, like, you want to hit your diagonals. It's more comfortable. And I think people would like it if they could feel it and they didn't feel that rocking, floating. So I got the D-pad cap, and I just glued it to the bottom piece of the actual mechanism. And then to relocate the D-pad, this is the actual silicone pads too, but to relocate it, I used copper tape, kind of like I've done here. Made some controllers for Game Boy DMGs, and it's just copper tape as the button contacts. And I was surprised to find out that I could solder to those. And yeah, so you just make new contacts, wire it up. So that's what I did under here. We have each button has two contacts, and just wire it up like regular pads. I ran the magnet wire over to the contacts of the original buttons, and that's it. Something I had to do to make room for the D-pad, because it's quite a bit bigger, which is why one of the reasons why I wanted it, is I had to make extra space on the board. So I used epoxy and put a couple flat areas under here to make these buttons fit. So normally we're looking at this. So these empty spaces actually have the button contacts on them on my build. In doing that, I covered up the power switch. That's why I had to relocate it. The start and select buttons, I did the same. I just wired using magnet wire, and I created this little bridge for them to sit on. And this part is a little bit finicky because I had to make it a lot thinner than I originally thought because of the battery. So here, if you press really hard, like I could just bend and snap this in the middle because it's so thin. But whenever it's in the case, it's rested on plastic and it's supported. So it's just something to be careful of when it's out of the case. These button caps are not round, which is something to be concerned with too. Whenever I first put them in here, I had painted and I got a little bit of paint inside of here, inside the button wells, and if they rotate, it would be a little bit too much friction in here and they would get kind of stuck. So I just cut out a little bit of extra space in here, and now when they rotate a little bit, I haven't noticed them getting stuck at all since I did that. The speakers. These are 1 watt 8 ohm speakers, but together, even both of those together, they're not as good as this single speaker that it comes with. I'm surprised by this thing. It's a really, really good speaker. So it's quieter. There's not as much of a full sound, no bass, of course. These things are so tiny. So if you love audio, you're not gonna love these speakers. They barely get the job done. I think I could help them to be a little bit better if I didn't want these to look as good as they do. I wanted them to look very simple and clean, but really the speaker centers are up higher. So if I wanted to, I can come back here and drill a few more holes to make the speaker grill be higher and get a little more sound out, but I want them to look better in the front, nice and clean. And I think the sound difference would not be like negligible anyway. So something that you could do a little bit differently with these. For the shoulder buttons, I use soft tack switches for the ones, and I just bent the 2 legs out, clipped off the other legs, and I actually had to file down a little bit on one side to make a little bit of room here. So you can see I've had to file just a little bit, just to the point where you can see the silicone through the plastic. So they would fit. Those 2 legs, they fit right through the original holes. So those weren't too bad. For the shoulder buttons, I took advantage of hot glue, put a little tack, tacked it in place, put it together, and checked the fit and feel. And I had to do it a few times back and forth to make sure that it wasn't rubbing. And once it was good, I just tacked it in more securely with hot glue and done. To make things easier, I put the light pipe here also and just tacked it together. So the analog sticks I hot glued in place. And it's a good thing that I did because the first one that I put here was reading wrong. The values were wrong. It was just, I guess it was cheap, and I bought these on eBay in a pack of like 5. So when that happened, I came through and I clipped down all of the glue, pulled it off, cleaned up the glue that was left over, and put on a new one. If I were to use epoxy or something, it would be a pain in the butt. And this thing really is, I mean, they're secure. They're not going anywhere. For the wiring, I use this little ribbon cable connector. 6-pin, 0.5 millimeter pitch ribbon cable connector. So there's 6 pins, there's 6 inputs. And this cable has only 5 wires. So I just make sure to press it all the way to one side. So we use the first 5 pins and not the last one. And it's pretty tricky to wire to these little pins. They're 0.5 millimeters apart, but it's possible. I think there's breakout boards for these two. I haven't used them because I can just use Captain tape. Like I showed in my Vita build, I showed wiring to these, and I use Captain tape to section off the pins that I don't want to touch. And then I solder to one, and I section off that one with Captain tape, and solder to the next one. And you know, it can be done. It's really finicky, but it works out fine whenever it's done. It looks like this or this. I just used a little bit of hot glue. I feel like I shouldn't say hot glue anymore. And then a little bit of Captain tape just to make a little protected bit of cable there. And I ran those wires from here. The screen sits on top of this, and there's enough room for a lot of stuff back here. Actually, you can put more stuff back here. Cables run around and to the back, on over to the add-on board. And then this cable just runs around the right side to the add-on board. I use some black foam to pretty it up on the outside. Just made donuts out of black foam. It was some packing material for my printer. There's a lot of this little thick, dense foam, so I keep it and I use it everywhere I can. I almost forgot to show the GPIO input pads back here. 35 through 39. So that's how I used the L3 and R3 clicks here. And I also damaged this board a little bit whenever I was filing it down. I ended up not being able to get this button to work anymore, so this shoulder button is connected back here also. I think that's about it. There's not really a whole lot of in-depth stuff going on in here, like I said. From my side, the board is really cool, but my part is just moving stuff around, basically. Oh, I guess we should look at the case here. So I had to do some changes to this, and there's a lot of stuff in here we can get rid of. So you can see there's a lot missing around here. Just not necessary for what we're doing. Oh, and the D-pad, I cut away a lot to make room for it. A lot of this wall becomes the guide for this part. And I glued in some pieces for this guide and for this guide. Actually, now that I have this all taken down, I might just glue in a little bit more to kind of, a little more shimmies in here, just to make it a little bit tighter. I got rid of a lot of stuff here for the speakers. This little piece is to block the light. A little bit of tape. Because when I did the full screen mod, I did it a little bit too wide. I'll fix that up in a little bit. So, these. I swapped these. And what I did was something like, I looked at the board and I put the case over the top of it and I cut out all of the areas, kind of a general cutout of what I thought it would be that I needed. Then I took some tape, taped over the giant ugly holes that I made. Then I used epoxy. I just filled in all of the area around it to make kind of like circle, kind of like a nice circle in what I thought would be the center area, the centermost area, and it was too small. I made two small circles to kind of to just fill it all in. I let it set up, and the next day I came back and I had flat new body to work with a small hole in the inside. Then I could put it back on, see exactly where I needed to cut. Then I just filed out the new perfect circular holes using a Dremel tool. And I actually had to do that a couple times because I messed it up the first time. So that's it, just a big nasty hole, some tape, some epoxy. Very low tech. One of the cool things about knowing that you're gonna paint the case is that you can just do stuff like this. Like I wasn't worried at all about cutting and damaging the case. Like normally you're really worried about like filing and you don't want to slip and scratch it. Here, I don't care. I just drilled and destroyed the case as much as possible, and you know, without worrying about it. And then I just cleaned it up with epoxy and painted it later. I'll try to put links to everything in the description. I think that about covers it. Let me know if I forgot anything. Thanks for watching.